Good evening, members. Welcome to our latest Friday night takeaway event with myself and Anna. We're delighted to be doing this event this evening. I think it's something we've both been looking forward to this week, pairing some lovely pizza with some delicious wines. Am I right in saying that, Anna? Something to
Absolutely. And 2 Fridays in a row, Catherine, we got to spend together.
Absolutely. Nothing that we love more than about food and wine. So members, I hope you do have your pizzas ready and your wines ready. You've got all four of them and then joining them for this evening.
Catherine, I don't know whether it's just me, but you've just started to sound like you're underwater.
Very strange. I'm not.
Members, do pop in the chat if Catherine sounds like she's underwater to you as well. We might need to just wiggle your screen around a little, Catherine. We did just do a test.
Ooh,
Julia says, yes, you do. Let's try again.
Is it still there?
It is a bit. I tell you what, Catherine, why don't you... Catherine's going to jump off screen and come back on again, and hopefully her problems will have resolved. We did just run a test just before this, members, so not quite sure what happened. In the 5 minutes we went to go and get our pizzas out of the oven, Catherine became a Dalek. So hopefully she'll come back to the land of the humans on land. But as Catherine was saying, it's absolutely wonderful to have you all here, and it's really fun. We did a wine and food event last Friday, Catherine and I, and we're delighted to have a second Friday in a row. For those of you that have never joined an event before, where have you been? You'll find that you can use the chat as members are doing now. Do remember to let us know where you are, what you're drinking, if you've got all four wines, but also when you're typing, make sure that you select everyone. The default for some sometimes can be hosts and panelists, and then only Catherine and I will see your messages. But I know that lots of members love to see where their fellow members are. So do make sure that you hit everyone. That sounds awful. Let's see if Catherine's back in the land of the living. Right, give it another go, Catherine.
Hey, does that sound any better?
There we go.
Lovely. I'm not going to touch anything except change my name.
Very good idea. Yeah, you've got the thumbs up. So one thing I would say, Catherine, is I'm getting a tiny echo, but maybe when I'm talking, I'll let you know if it gets worse, but I think it's all right. So I've told members to let us know where they are and what they're drinking and to use the chat. And I've also not yet said, but I should say that if you do have any questions, we're going to save some time at the end. And so please put questions either in the chat or in the Q&A. So I'm going to hand back over to Catherine. I've finished the intro, Catherine, whilst you were de-Daleking. So there you go.
So hopefully now we'll just sound normal, and I'll just keep my hands away from the laptop, and hopefully it won't make any more mistakes. The one thing that I would say as well, members, is myself and Anna made a bit of a dash to get the pizzas out of the oven. If you have done the same, please do not wait to be eating them. Eat them while they're warm. If they're a bit too hot, let them cool down, obviously. We don't want any burnt mouths affecting tasting the wine, but don't hold off on enjoying your pizza this evening. This is a fun hour of sort of exploring flavour, and you can only do that by eating and drinking. So I think what is the best thing to do is kick off with the first pairing that we've gone for. So the first two wines, we have decided to sort of pair them with the white base mushroom pizza or other white base style pizza. The key thing is that it's a pizza that doesn't have any sort of tomato on it. So go with those, but obviously try them as you will with the any other pizzas that you have this evening. I will talk about the one that I have got first, then hand back to Anna. So wine number 1 is the Lieu Blanc. It's a Dédicace from Chateau Lieu Blanc 2020 vintage. There we go, lovely clear white wine in the glass. So this is 100% Chenin Blanc. It is from Limoux, which is down in the Aude Valley in the Languedoc. So Anna is hopefully you'll be able to see, members, the little arrow pointer down on the map there. And what's really interesting about this area, particularly from a climate perspective is that it's at that confluence of having influence from the Mediterranean and also the Atlantic. So you've got those lovely warming Mediterranean influences, meaning the grapes get lovely and ripe. But then you've also got your cooling influences from the Atlantic, which helps temper any of the over warmth and keeps the acidity and freshness. And acidity and freshness is something that we're really looking for when you're wanting to pair the wines with a creamier white base. Someone has just commented saying that we thought it was a white baked pizza. Having said that, that sounds delicious. And if you put white baked on a white base, you know, you've got your lovely fried white bait with a nice bit of that ocean influence of the wine. I can see that working really well. But no, we are talking about a white base. So that's either sort of a bechamel sort of sauce base, or perhaps more bits of your softer cheese spread style of base, or more of a sort of a buttered base. Yes, lovely. So this is from Chateau Lieu Blanc. So it's 100% Chenin Blanc, and Chateau Lieu Blanc are a 22 hectare sort of vineyard operation. There they are down in the darker green section of Limoux. They really focus on having some lovely sustainability elements to their winemaking. This is a lovely map off of their own website, which I highly recommend taking a visit to. And you will see down at the bottom where you've got Vineyard A, which is Eden, right down at the bottom next to where it says winery. That is where the grapes, the Chenin grapes for this wine are sourced from. The owners are Jan and Carol Panman. They bought it in 2001, and they employed veteran winemaker Eric Villard to focus on the winemaking. They had spent about 12 years. They'd spent many years working in 12 different countries over 4 continents before they decided to turn their attention to winemaking. Now, Limoux is in the foothills of the French Pyrenees, and the name Rive Blanc also comes because they're in the shadow of the mountain Rive Blanc. So they've got a real protective influence. And if you're able to go back to the vineyard sort of map as well, you will also see that they have a huge density of forest around them. They are within the Natura 2000 EU protected nature reserve, so they've got all of this lovely forest around them as well. There's a lot of sort of different flora and fauna, as you can see detailed around this beautiful map. They do really feel then that they want to represent the terroir of the area for their grapes, and they really sort of focus on keeping it as sort of hands-off or hands-on in a sustainable way. So things that they will do are eschewing chemical fertilizers, and instead they will plant a lot of lovely cover crop of wildflowers, clovers, also some cereals between the vines. They will use composted grape skins and the pips that are ploughed back into soil to add in a lovely bit of nutrients as well. One thing which is particularly interesting, instead of using the pesticides, they will use pheromones to sexually confuse the pests that may cause a bit of havoc in their vineyards and affect the fruit. So they really do want to focus on getting the best they can from the grapes, and that starts from the ground up.
I like how quickly you glossed over sexual confusion of.
Well, it's one of those things. It's perhaps a bit more topical nowadays, but it's something that really does work. And if you're just gonna, it might not be too nice if you're putting sort of some anthropomorphized sort of feelings onto the pests. But if it just tears them away, they don't need to try and find a mate. They can leave the grapes to do their things. It works really quite well. They have a lovely bit of altitude as well. They're at 350 meters, which means that they also are keeping any diseases and fungal infections at bay with that, and with the brisk winds that come through as well. So it keeps it lovely and aerated, because obviously there's nothing that a fungal infection likes more than a damp, humid environment. So they don't want that. And it all comes down to making sure they have this lovely purity and freshness and clean. I say clean, it's not going to be dirty, but pristine quality to the wine. So if you do have this, do have a sip. Let us know what you think.
So immediately, Catherine, one thing I would say is, and I don't know, members may disagree with me, but so I love Lieu Chenin and I've drunk it for a long time, but I just gave my father a glass of this, who's sat downstairs, and his first reaction was, this doesn't smell like Chenin.
It doesn't.
And he's used to Chenins from the Loire, and it's a really different ball game here, isn't it?
It is. There's a lot more of the sort of honeyed melony fruits. It's a little bit more tropical to the fruit in comparison to your Loire Chenins, which have a little bit more of that greenness. And also, I don't think personally this has as much of that slight waxy texture or aroma that you can get with a Loire Chenin. It is a little brighter and fresher. There's a perception of sweetness there. The fruit is so ripe. It only actually has a residual sugar of 1.9 grams per litre. So it is a dry wine, but you've got that real lovely, ripe, sort of tropical leaning fruit as well. That really, when you're having it with, going to the point of the pairing, with something that is creamy and rich and can be quite salty. Richard's commented that it's got a nice acidity, but it's not extremely tart. And it isn't. And I don't think you want it to be when you're having it with something like this. It has got a element of creaminess to it as well. It's fermented and aged in seasoned oak barrels. The barrels are from 200-year-old trees in a very rigorously controlled oak forests in the Massif Central and the Vosges. Limoux is the only white wine appellation in France that demands vinification, both the fermenting and the aging of the wine in oak barrels. So that adds that lovely bit of texture to it as well. And it does undergo some batonnage. So yeah, you're getting the lovely textural element to it. It's got a slight creamy note, which pairs nicely with the base of the pizza. Also, let's not forget, talking about crusts, you've got your stone baked element perhaps, or like a thinner crust, but all of them will have that cereally, mealy quality to them. So you want to have a little bit of that in there as well.
That's a good point.
It's something, it's something that you're looking, and we've said it time and time again, you're looking at it as a complete picture in terms of what flavors will work together. And that's a key thing. It's flavor and texture and structure, not so much of you've got the exact same thing going on. It's a balance between complementing and contrasting, which I think this one really does it. And also, we're talking about the base a lot, but we've also spoken about mushrooms. That's what we've suggested as the go-to topping. And they've got that lovely earthy umami quality to it. I don't think you need something particularly tart and sharp to compete with that, because it all comes together in a sort of earthy, slight sweetness from mushrooms as well. Often, I mean, my pizza definitely has some garlic, and it's got a bit of spinach just for, I don't know, maybe they make the green, add a bit of green, make you think it's good for you. But you've got a lot going on. There's a lot of flavour and savoury savoury flavours to it. So really, I'm looking for a lovely sort of ripe, full fruit, not too much in the acidity. Liz and Ash have just said it's lovely, not usually a fan of Chenin. And I would say, yeah, perhaps if Chenin's one you wouldn't necessarily look to, Limoux is a nice place to look for Chenin that's slightly different to what you might be expecting from elsewhere.
And I think for me, this is a Chenin more made in a South African style than a French style.
Yeah, I would say
jolly and silly, and
it's approachable. It's pleasing to drink. It's a really fun makes it sound a bit too lighthearted, but it's a really nice, friendly Chenin. It's
I think fun wines and pizzas are legit.
Absolutely, because there may be people that would say wine is not what you pair with a pizza. But actually, if you are a wine drinker, as we are, and we like to have a glass of wine with our pizza of an evening, if you've got a mushroom and a white base, then this is a strong contender.
I like it. I think it's a lovely pairing. And funnily enough, your honey comment is one thing that my wine, the orange wine that we were going to go on to in a moment, it's one of the reasons I chose that. So I think we've both gone for something quite similar, which is that lovely thing where you've got lots of white cheese. And I don't know if you know, one of my favorite sort of wine pairings I've ever had was in a winery in California, where they shaved off some tête de moine, monk's head, put it on a piece of bread, so let's be honest, not a million miles off a white-based pizza, and just drizzled some honey on the top of it, and we had it with a really, really honeyed Chardonnay, and it was amazing because you've got that umami base with the cheese, some saltiness, bringing out the fruit, but then this honeyed character in the wine. So I don't think it's coincidence that both of us have picked a wine with a touch of sort of honey flavor.
Absolutely, and I think this will have a little bit of development. If you were to leave it in bottle, it would get a little bit more in that, maybe leans a little bit more towards the slight quincy sort of fruit to it, and that honey will just sort of mellow through. Really, really quite nice. I mean, I don't think I could keep it for very long. It's really lovely.
It's lovely. Right, I'm conscious that mine might need some explaining. Because I mean, orange wine and pizza is a slightly unusual one. So what I might do, Catherine, I know I was going to talk about the origins of pizza, but whilst people are eating that white pizza, I might just explain my wine first, and then I'll go on to the origins of pizza. I don't want this wine to go without explanation. So I went wild with my choice this evening, and I picked a wine from Burgenland in Austria, which I don't know if the map's come up. My screen's gone blank.
Yeah, no, I can see the map. Members, let us know if you can.
Hopefully you can. Yes, good. Yeah. Julia says yes. Wonderful. So you can see hopefully you can see most of the Austrian wine growing regions are sort of bordering Hungary, Slovenia, all of that sort of jazz. Let me see. Oh, yeah, got it. So Burgenland on your map should be, fingers crossed, basically hugging Hungary, right on the border. And the reason I mention it is there's a lot of Austrian, Hungarian wine influences that come into some producers in Burgenland. And I think that this is an example, not exclusively. You know, there are plenty of more sort of what you might think of as more traditional wines, but the reality is this actually is a traditional wine. This is a very, very old technique of winemaking. And orange wine is a funny thing because it's essentially white wine or white grapes treated like red grapes. And what happens is all of your grapes get most of their color from the skins. And in white wines, there's obviously not much color to work with. So usually what happens is you press those grapes and you leave the skins out altogether. So for the first wine we had, we would have left those skins out completely. With an orange wine, you leave the skins macerating. So it's a bit like making white grape tea. And that's how you would make a red wine, but you do that with red grapes. Here, they've chosen Grüne Veltliner Pinot Blanc Chardonnay, and they've basically let those skins macerate. So what you get is a lot more color, but you also get this touch of something else you find in the skins, which is tannin. Now that can be slightly bitter, and a lot of orange wines are very bitter and they cry out for food. You know, they're almost not undrinkable, but they're challenging without food. Whereas this wine is I think Freddie describes it as on the fun end of the spectrum. Yeah, it's much more refreshing and light. But it's also unfiltered. And I've seen a comment already saying, can't get my head around hazy wine. There are other wines that are very hazy. This one looks particularly hazy because it's white. Chances are you've had very hazy red wines, but we all kind of get this brain explosion when we think about hazy white wines because we assume it shouldn't look like this. They've not added anything here. There's nothing, dangerous, scary, anything like that. It's just what we're used to. The reality is, this is all good stuff in here. It's sort of solid matter that's going to add more texture, more flavor. So it's really good for me. I wouldn't be an advocate for drinking any orange wine under the sun. A lot of them aren't well made, and a lot of them are brilliantly made. This happens to be, in my opinion, a very, very well made one. Obviously, it's personal preference, but I think it's really well made. And I think for a few reasons. One is the blend of those grape varieties. So it's got Chardonnay, which is obviously a bit more body, but the Gruner Veltliner will bring lots of vibrant acidity. But the reason I picked it is this honeyed character. And you almost have to think about, when you're tasting an orange wine, almost put aside everything that you've ever thought about wines before. There's a little bit of Muscat Onotel in this. Onotel. My dyslexia is coming through. And that's going to bring you this slightly grapey aroma and character. And still with that freshness from the Gruner, and I think there's a touch of Sauvignon Blanc, but not noticeable in terms of flavour. But Gruner's definitely going to bring you lots and lots of lovely acidity. So there should be freshness with that touch of grape skin tannins, but the fruit should still be very, very evident. There is some old oak in this, but I really don't think you would be able to tell. But they also use amphoras as well, which is again a very traditional winemaking technique. And in terms of if anyone wants the real geeky stuff, the grapes were left, depending on the variety, between 8 and 14 days to gather this complexity. They used indigenous yeasts. They didn't use any enzymes. So in all pretenses of the word natural wine, that's what this is. But for me, above all else, it's the honey character.
Yeah.
It doesn't need, when you've got no tomato is the real battle when you're pairing pizza and wine, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But when you are pairing the tomato element of a pizza, it can be really sharp. We've talked about that already, and it can make your wine seem quite flat. So I quite like the idea of having quite sharp red wines. I don't think you need to do that with the whites, like Catherine explained, when you've got a pizza bianca. Mine's actually basically ricotta and goat's cheese. I'm in France, and they're not notoriously great for their variety of pizzas in France. It's quite hard to find pizza without Emmental on, actually. There's just a lot of Emmental. But I found one that was goat's cheese and ricotta, and actually the ricotta is what's really, really working with this. It's what I had in mind when I originally did the pairing. So I'm going to try it again and try and get some more, almost like a beer, would you say, Catherine? I know that's a weird thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, because where we briefly touched on it, of, you know, if perhaps you're of the opinion that best wine to pair with a pizza is a beer, then this is actually, you know, within that realm of style. It's got a slight spritz, a slight little prickle to it, doesn't it? Which I think also has a really nice crispness in clearing through. Yeah. I'm getting a lot of sort of like windfally orchard fruit as well, along with that honey. And it's funny you mentioning about not being able to find a pizza without Emmental. It really brought it home to me, this one, that it's got that slight Breton cider element to it. And I've had a really good dry Breton cider with a mushroom and Emmental galette. And, you know, again, not a million miles away from a carb and delicious cheesy toppings, you know, style of dish. Yeah. It really, really works. I think as well, it's a really, as orange wines goes, like you saying, it's a really approachable style. It's a nice, I don't want to say it's an entry level, because it's not, but it's one that if you are entering the world of orange wine, it's one that I'd really recommend looking to, because it doesn't have as much of that bitter astringency as some others can do. And I think, again, that is down to the grape varieties used, and you're getting so much flavour coming through from it.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this wine, I know we've talked a lot about how traditional and its traditional style of winemaking, particularly when we talk about amphoras. And things like that, but actually the producer, so Pitnauer, Gerard, inherited the family estate very tragically. His father suddenly died, so at 18 years old he inherited this estate, and he did quite a lot of traveling to understand what he wanted to bring to the estate. And they do make, you know, non-orange wines and other styles, but he, after his extensive traveling, really wanted to bring technology to what is a traditional region of winemaking. and the technology, and I use that in inverted commas, but things like, obviously we all love to think that wine's super romantic and gorgeous, and it's just some people, you know, quaffing and treading grapes. But the reality is top quality wine is made with the utmost precision. You've got microbes flying around, you've got all sorts of issues, should we say, that could potentially go wrong. Your wine can be vinegar, it can have Brettanomyces, everything can go wrong. And often this sort of orange wine movement has been assimilated with faulty wines. Yep. Because, and actually Kath's just said, I've had an unfortunate experience with orange wine. There's a lot of, because it's so trendy at the moment, this style, there's a lot of people going, oh, well, it's so traditional, you just chuck all the grapes in an amphora and everything will be okay. And that's just not the case. So Gerard has basically brought modern technology, you know, the ability to analyze the microbes, all of that stuff, to make sure that he can produce a consistently good quality. And whether you like it or not is subjective, but the quality, i.e. it's not faulty, it preserves fruit character, all of the things that he's trying to do, he's managed to do. So I think for me, that's the other reason why it's a really good starter for an orange wine exploration, because you kind of know what you're going to get. And Julia said, orange wines and natural wines are often seen as the same thing.
They seem to become synonymous, and
it's just not true. This one happens to be both, if you want to define natural, which nobody wants to do. I've just written an MW essay on exactly that topic. Define natural wine. Does it need a definition? So yes, it's a really challenging style of wine for a lot of traditional drinkers to get their heads around, even though the irony is that this is a style of wine that would have been made thousands of years ago. And to the quick point we had a little moment ago in the chat, which was William asked, is there a tradition of orange wine in Austria/Hungary, or is this a decision? There is a tradition of amphora wines in this part of the world, but I wouldn't say specifically orange wines. But skin contact, yes, and particularly in Hungary. But then basically everywhere that you sort of, Georgia is what's seen as the industry standard for amphora style wines, which are often white wines with skin maceration. I did a lovely tasting recently called the Amber Revolution, focusing on Georgian skin maceration wines. So yes, there is a tradition here, William, but I wouldn't say it's the sort of leader of the movement. But yeah, I hope people who've not tried an orange wine before at least enjoyed the experience to some extent. It's also not an expensive one. Some people charge a fortune for orange wine that is, quite frankly, sometimes faulty. So Liz and Ash said they were dubious, but they like it, especially the honey flavours. And I'm very pleased.
I think it's delicious.
Good.
It really, really is. If you were, based on this, if you were keen to explore your orange wines a little further, I have just popped one of the Georgian ones in the chat that we do, which is a really lovely one to perhaps do as your next orange wine in your exploration of skin contact.
Absolutely. So I'm going to quickly mention now why we decided to do a white pizza, because I think it's fair. And for anybody who's been watching Stanley Tucci's Italy, really got some inspiration from that program. Catherine,
general life inspiration from
both obsessed with it. So I did my own research other than just watching Stanley Tucci's Italy, which obviously I was research myself, because in the program, if anybody's seen it, Stanley talks to I think it's a journalist historian about the origins of pizza, and he's visiting Naples, and they taste something called a pizzetti, I think it's called, which is essentially this fried bread that came from the cholera pandemic, because by frying it, it was basically a little mini dough that they then stuffed with mainly white things, so cheese, lard, etc. There were no tomatoes. And then they folded it up and they fried it. And it was therefore more sanitary because of the cholera outbreak. But actually, you sort of have to go a little bit further back to learn where pizza really comes from. The word itself has been around since about 900 AD. And it comes from a morph of the Latin word pinza, which is the past tense of pensare, to flatten out. My father will kill me for my Latin pronunciation there, but I'm not sure I mind. It's been a long time since I did a Latin lesson. But effectively, they sort of came over, if you want to call it that, from, or were an evolution of a Greek flatbread. But the breads originally were very much cheese, lard, white was the original. And that is because until the 18th century, tomatoes were not grown in Italy. They were introduced in the 18th century. Again, that is part of Stanley Tucci's program.
Thank you, Stanley.
Stanley. But some say that the Americans, or from the Americas, I should say, obviously they weren't Americans, some say from Spain, but really it's only around the 18th century that we start to add our tomato bases to our cheese, our basil, and we get the invention of the margherita pizza, which obviously is now, I think, the world's favorite food, or at least, actually, that does lead me on nicely. I believe that actually the pepperoni pizza is the world's favorite food because it is the biggest or the most consumed pizza in America.
Wow.
And therefore, that as the US is the biggest consumer of pizza in the world, I believe that makes it the favorite pizza. But interestingly, as we segue beautifully onto the pepperoni, that wasn't intentional, but it worked out nicely. It's interesting because pepperoni naturally is not an Italian word. It's an American word, really. So even when I was shopping for my pizzas here in France, you still see salami. So if you have a more authentic Italian pizza, you might have a salami version. And of course, we also suggested you didn't need to have meat, anything with a little bit of spice. I must say, a sort of spiced tomato, and I saw somebody mention an aubergine earlier, but something with some other sort of denser vegetables, but actually a spicy vegetarian pizza is one of the most delicious gifts.
Absolutely, that tomato and heat, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's lovely. Keith's a meatarian, he says, so he's been quietly drinking the 2 reds with the Waitrose Italian takeout pepperoni pizza. Very good and recommended.
I think we have the same pizza, Keith. I made a Waitrose stop off on the way home from work today.
Oh, well, I've got a salami as opposed to but it does say spicy salami, so I'm hoping it will work. But a couple of fun facts, and then we will move. In fact, should we go into the first wine and then I'll do some fun facts afterwards?
Yes,
yeah, because people are thirsty for some reds, I can tell. So I'm going to do this as well because it makes more sense to do the Chianti first. So if you're tasting along this evening, then we've really got I would like to say the authentic pairing now. Look, Waitrose have spicy Calabrian salami. There we go. We could have a big debate, couldn't we, Kat? It wouldn't be very interesting. We could. Who's got salami and who's got pepperoni? I think we've got better things to talk about. Let's talk about Chianti. So Chianti, this, like I mentioned, probably the most classic of the pairings. This is it's a beautiful winery, actually. And again, Catherine mentioned going on the website of her Lieu. I actively encourage you to go on Castello La Leccia's website, not just to look at the winery. And in fact, since I've last been on their website, they've actually had a huge shift. So if anybody is looking for a holiday, they have the most beautiful, I'm sure it's not cheap, but the most beautiful agriturismo options. So if you want to sort of while away the rest of your evening after the call and look at some glorious hilltop views, then I can strongly recommend this winery. But it's obviously a Tuscan wine, Chianti, one of the oldest and most traditional, and this particular winery is no exception. So this particular winery dates back to the castle itself is actually that's on the hill actually dates back to 1077, and then I think it's about the 18th century, about the time tomatoes came along. The castle got rebuilt, so it looks a bit less like a castle and more like a manor house now. And in the 20s, what I find amazing is the hamlet, the castle house, and a 70-person hamlet was actually bought by the Daddy family, who owned it until quite recently and basically set up the wine production. So they started the wine element here, and they made some quite groundbreaking choices, one of which was to produce organically, and way before organics was trendy, but they knew that they needed to be custodians of this land. So they tended it with care. They sold the business in 2018, it could be 19, to a Swiss gentleman who has basically continued the project as they ran it, but he now has the financial burden, which I must say is a smart move from anyone who's tried to ever dip their hand in the wine industry. So it's still 100% organic, no herbicides, no pesticides, and really a very, very well regarded winery. You can see here it was one of our Wine Champions winners in 2022, and the only reason we have any left of it is because we did another huge second order to get more in. Chianti is produced from 100, well, it actually legally doesn't have to be. This is 100% Sangiovese, great variety. It doesn't have to be. There's some rules around Classico, Reserva, etc. I think it's 85% for Classico, but this is 100%. Hand harvested. What they do here that I think is different, that's worth talking about, or not different, but worth noting, is they use stainless steel tanks, temperature controlled. They use a lot of the technology as well. So they do something called cryo maceration for 24 hours. If you want to know more about that, that's a Google. But essentially, it's like an intensified maceration. So instead of leaving the grapes on the skins for days and days and potentially getting some bad aromas that might form, they do a very intense version for 24 hours. And they do some short, frequent pump overs. So the whole production process is really quite quick, but you get this beautiful coloured wine. And because of that stainless steel in the fermentation, they can keep the temperature controlled. So they don't get jammy flavours. They can keep it really fresh and sort of I noticed sort of dried cranberries. I get dried cranberries, but I get loads of currants, really red, beautiful fruits. And the other thing I like about Chiantis that are made in this kind of more elegant and refined style, for me personally, is that they get a bit herbal as well. After they've done all of that, they put it in concrete tanks and very old oak. So the old oak's not going to give you flavor. It's just going to slightly soften those tannins up. So I think it's about 2,000 litres, these big, big, big barrels. So not your little Burgundy barrels or your Bordeaux barrels. And a tiny little bit of time in bottle. But generally, because of that kind of short, quick extraction, you can drink these wines young. And yes, they'll age. I'm not sure what Sarah's put on her drink dates. 2026, yeah, easily. Of course you can age this wine. But what's really nice for me with the pizza is this freshness. So the reason I think it's great, and the reason that a lot of Italian wines do go with pizza, is naturally there's this sort of unifier of Italian white wines for me with this acidity, this really great high acid, and it cuts through the fatty meat, the cheeses, but it is that tartness. And I don't mean that as a negative. We spoke about tart earlier. I really mean that as a positive. We can call it bright, refreshing, crisp, whatever you want to call it. But actually, tart for me is a positive here. And that is great with that tomato. Tomato can be quite bitter and sweet at the same time. So you've got a wine that's slightly bitter and sweet as well. Dare I say it, and this isn't meant as a bad thing, but volatile acidity, that really quite like on the edge of being quite arresting in the nose, which a lot of Italian wines play very, very close to that line. And I don't think this has any volatile acidity in the bad sense, but that kind of really like freshness to the point of, oh yeah, this is, any more fresh than this and it might be challenging. The reason I think that's what's so good with Italian wines is it basically encourages you to have food with them. You need to have food with a wine like this, and I think that's perfect. The tannins aren't too high. There's enough for some interest and some structure. There's an amazing savory note that I did just touch on, kind of like dried herbs and spices. It's just got a bit of everything, and I just can't believe it for the price. It's one of my favorite. It's young, but it's fresh, it's juicy, and importantly, it's one of those happy wines for happy foods for me.
Absolutely. I mean, I find Italian wines aren't wines that I tend to automatically lean towards when I think, oh, I'm going to get a bottle of wine or I'm going to look for something new. But it's so, I don't want to say bright because it feels, too less of a descriptor, but it's got that really lovely bright, it's palate cleansing with that freshness. It's a lovely lift to it. It's that really crunchy red fruit.
Yeah.
But also the dried fruit as well that it's coming through, and it's dried in a concentrated sense of, it's really intensifying the flavor rather than it being, oh, it's all a bit dried out, there's nothing much going on for it. It's really coming together. It's almost as if, I don't know if you've ever made sort of like fruit leather, when you kind of puree it up and really concentrate it and dehydrate it down, and you've got that lovely intensity of flavor while still keeping the initial sort of primary character flavor of the fruits that you're looking at. And like you said, the tannins are really integrated. They're a little bit plush, a little bit dusty. They're there. I can feel them, but actually it's just nice to go with the saltiness of the meat as well. It all just rounds out nicely together. It's really great.
I know. And it's I think for me, again, I've mentioned my dad so many times on this tasting. He was very opinionated on that. But he said, "Oh, are you going to have a Naples red?" And it was sort of listing off lots of very, very big southern Italian. I know Naples isn't super far south, but some more southerly and much richer wines. And I said, I don't think pizza needs it. I don't think you need to go for your huge Negro Amaros or Nero d'Avolas. I think actually sometimes it depends, doesn't it, on your ratio of what you've got on a pizza. There's such variability. And if you've got this huge flavor bomb, then yeah, sure, maybe you want something with a bit more punch. But I think the vast majority of pizzas have this lovely balance of the sweetness, the savory, but by and large, obviously they're delicious. And anybody who, I've seen so many people who've used their uni ovens this evening. If you are having that thin base, often a lighter wine for me is actually better.
Yeah.
If you're having huge, big, deep pan, Chicago style, then maybe you do want something bigger. But for me, that is a lightness of touch that I like.
Absolutely. I think as well, you can't forget that pizza's not a meal that you necessarily savor over for a long time. So you can't have, for me, I wouldn't want to go for a wine that will need some time to, get used to being in the glass before you can approach it. It needs to have 3 or 4 hours to come into its own. We're talking about pizza here, that's going to be disappearing quite quickly.
Exactly.
It's a finger food. It needs an element of quaffing to the wine, has to be there, and it does have that lovely refreshing cleansing quality that means you're going to have a nice sip or a slightly larger sip, and then you'll go back to your next bite of pizza. It really, that's how I would want to approach it.
And on that quaffing note, Catherine, I'm excited about quaffing your wine. So
well,
how do you feel?
As I was saying things, I was realizing that actually we're going on to quite a bigger wine. But I'll give you the reasoning to why this was chosen. So let's go on to our fourth wine. As Anna said, we'll have some time for questions. We've already had a couple come through. So if you do have any others, pop them in the Q&A for us. But the next wine number 4, is the Pampaluna Garnacha Syrah Mazuelo from Calatayud. It's the 2020 vintage, and it is a big Spanish red. You may have seen, members, that our wine buyers will often do a little video clip for some of our wines as a descriptor on the website. And I was actually watching the one that Pierre did for this today, and he described it perfectly, as you expect he would, being the buyer, but as a full throttled wine. And I think it really is. So this is we'll go straight to it. This is the highest alcohol of the 4 wines. This is a 15% alcohol wine.
I don't think it tastes.
However,
it
is integrated. It is integrated very well, and it's got a lot of flavor, a lot of fruit flavor, and a lot of nice bit of structure in that going through as well. And also, if you're having it with a food that has that element of spice and heat there, you've already got a lot going on. So actually, a slightly higher alcohol in this sense, when it is done so well and doesn't stick out, isn't going to really, blow your head off necessarily. It's actually, in partnership with the intensity of flavor that you've already got going on. We describe it as like it's big, it's rich, plump and peppery. Again, if you're having a pizza that doesn't have meat on it, but you've gone for a bit of a fiery vegetarian style, there's little Ricchito peppers, so those real little pops, little firecrackers of a pepper would go really well with this sort of wine. It is produced by El Escotes Volante, which translates as the Flying Scotsman, and is the brainchild of Spanish resident but Scottish winemaker Norrell Robertson, who is an MW. He became an MW in 2000. He decided that he wanted to go more into winemaking, having spent a bit of time selling fine wines, a bit more on the trade side in Edinburgh. And then so he decided to learn from the seller up, had placements in Chianti, Portugal, Australia, France, Chile, eventually did a postgrad viticulture and enology course at Lincoln University in Christchurch in 2003. And it's at that point that he also came to Spain with his wife Sharon, their two boys, James and Will, and they decided to undertake this venture. In 2020, so very recently, he was inducted into the Gran Orden de Caballeros del Vino. So really is making moves in the Spanish sort of wine scene, the Garnacha scene, and really wants to focus on Garnacha as the grapes. As you'll see, this is a blend. It is got some Syrah in there, and also some Mazuelo, which is the Spanish term for Carignan, but it is predominantly Garnacha. It's Aragon that they are based in, and so it's more for the raw quality of the Garnacha that they actually have in that region. They've got 32 hectares, mainly old vine, that are between 50 and 115 years old. And they also then look to the more indigenous varieties as well, so the Mazuelo, Moristel, Macabo in the white. They are undertaking some new plantings for their Garnacha as well. So they're so invested in it as a varietal that they are planting. In the last couple of years, they've been undertaking some new plots. They were really taken with the extreme of the landscape that they've got there. It's got a real beautiful rugged quality to it. There is the continental climate that's coming through, so lots of lovely sunshine for ripening those grapes. Then you've got the extreme diurnal range, so you get those really cool nights, meaning that you're not going over jammy, you're not going too ripe in your fruit. And it also has they dry grow their vines, so basically they leave the sort of irrigation or watering of the vines to the whims of nature. They let it do its own thing, and that means that they keep their yields nice and low, which really concentrates what they're going to get from the fruit from their vines. Any of you that are perhaps keen gardeners will know that, if you want to put your plants under a little bit of stress, it means that they're putting their efforts into the things that will help them continue. So that is either their fruit or their flowers. You don't need a lot of, we're kind of going back to the topic of mating here, but you don't need a lot of leaves to attract pollinators. You need fruit and flowers. So a little bit of stress means they put their concentration into that element. And so the yields are low, but they are very concentrated, which means they're very attractive to those pollinators and also very attractive to the winemakers, because you've got lots of lovely fruit flavor there. You've got your structure, you've got your acidity. As I said, we've got lovely old vines. The vineyards are also planted at about 700 to 950 meters above sea level. So again, you've got that altitude giving you your sort of tempering quality in making sure that your grapes don't get too hot, get too much, to make a really beautiful, rich, delicious, tasty wine. I think it's something that it does sort of call out for food, but it is one I think you could just enjoy of an evening, but it is delicious with the pizza.
I think Lucinda and Annie have actually just hit the nail on the head as well. They've said this one had enough in it, enough go in it.
Yeah, it's gutsy.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of slight point I tried to make about it. It does depend on your specific pizza. So I think for me, do you know what I will say, Catherine? It was really fun with the I don't know what my sausage was spiced with here today, being a French take on an Italian salami, who knows? But I must say that it went really well with the spice. It went better with the spice. I think the Chianti for me was good with the tomato, but actually I was really surprised how well that went with the spice. It had this like sweetness that almost, you always get told that spice and alcohol are a fire, burn on burn, but because of that really like voluptuous sweet fruit, it actually felt that it kind of exaggerated all the good bits of the spice, but had this lovely complementary sweetness.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's easy to kind of write spice off sometimes, but you're getting flavor as well. So it does, and I've got some chilies on my pizza. So let's not forget, it is a pepper. It might have heat to it, but it also has that lovely fruity pepper flavor. So you want some lovely concentrated fruit in your wine. And I agree, you've got that it's not always going to be a bad thing to have a little bit of a pepped up alcohol with some pepped up spice. It can work in harmony.
Yeah. And somebody's just said that Papa Luna drinks above its price point, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree. And it's quite fun. It's named after the Aragonese cardinal and anti-pope Pedro Martinez de Luna. So if you want to do any sort of history exploring on him afterwards, do. It's quite an interesting man. But yeah, really.
Now we do have a couple of questions, but Catherine, can I please just tell you some of the facts I found? Because I've got
I love a good fact.
And I didn't mean to have a segue, but I have got, and members are going to launch a poll whilst I maybe do my facts as well, so you can let us know your favorite wine. But the first one I must just say is that the best unusual topping on a pizza I've ever had, given that we're drinking a red wine made by a Scotsman, is haggis pizza. Yum. Delicious.
Yum. Go with so many wines as well.
I was just about to say, I actually think your wine would probably be better with haggis, just purely for like flavor overload situation. But whilst I launch the poll, members, so you can let us know which your favorite was, and I apologize to the those who I did see something flash up that the second wine, the orange wine, was actually good with the spicy pizza as well. So I apologize, I didn't even consider that as an option.
I'm going to have a little try. So I can see that working.
So I'll have to wait and see if there's any left for me downstairs. And Barry's just said that he also agrees haggis pizza is delicious. It's wonderful. So other fun facts about pizza toppings. Nordic countries have a very unusual tradition. So first of all, they have reindeer pizza, which probably would be quite scary for children. But in Sweden, they have something called banana curry pizza, which is exactly as it sounds. It's slices of banana with curry powder on top. Interested, Catherine?
Maybe not, but it does beat the strangest topping I've ever had on a pizza. Well, it was part of a group of pizzas ordered on a school trip by some teachers in where were we? We were in Budapest, and I don't know why this was chosen, but it was tuna, onion, and olive. And I don't want to say that is a typical Hungarian topping for pizzas. Bear in mind, it was definitely a takeaway sort of pizza, fast food, rather than something from a restaurant. And I struggle to think what sort of wine you would pair with that contrasting amalgamy of flavour. But I think I would take the reindeer over that.
Sarah and Heinz have said that in South Africa, one of the favourite toppings is bacon, banana, and feta, and it's so good.
The bacon and banana I can get on board with. Bacon and banana on a waffle. How far removed is that really from a pizza?
There we go. You've got a convert. Now we're all going to have to try it. One thing, and I think that, well, this is unverified, but I believe that the speciality in Brazil, and I haven't fact checked it, but peas.
Oh.
Green peas. And I kind of think that would be delicious.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. It's not too far off of your spinach, your kind of green chlorophyll flavour.
And somebody, Caroline, has just written about the ultimate room divider, which is pineapple on a pizza. So, Catherine, did you know, and you're always very knowledgeable about such things, I suggest you probably did know, but first of all, that Hawaiian pizza, i.e. pineapple pizza, was actually invented by by a Greek in a Canadian pizza shop. So not even anywhere near Hawaii, and in Canada. So why there were pineapples knocking around and that was the decision, I don't know. We've already started the debate. It's happening. And then I don't know whether anybody remembers, but in 2017, the president of Iceland said he was so opposed to pineapples on a pizza that if he could ban it legally, he would. And got into a huge, if you Google it, it's the most entertaining thing to read about. He got into loads and loads of trouble, and he had to sort of redact it and say that everybody's allowed free choice, and if you choose to put pineapple on your pizza, that's okay. But yes, you can Google, I can't remember his name, I wouldn't even be able to pronounce it if I could, but Iceland's president in 2017, which was great. Well, and then last but not least, there is actually a protected association of Napolitana pizza, so the Associazione Barace Pizza Napolitana, and the rules are 35 centimeters maximum, so you can't have these crazy big silly things. You're only allowed to cook, I think it's 60 to 90 seconds, something like that, you know, in quick turn round out, and you are never allowed to include pineapple.
So I would not be welcome.
You would not be welcome, you would be thrown out. Somebody's written free choice, but no. And another, Lynn said pineapple on pizza should be banned. And Liz and Ash have said yes to pineapple.
I mean, I go for a bit of pineapple sometimes on a pizza. It's with a bit of ham, you know.
Yeah, you're looking for a sweetness to contrast the salty, right? So my personal view is you can find it in other places. It doesn't have to be pineapple. Somebody earlier mentioned prunes or something along those lines.
Maybe interesting.
Prunes were the flavour of the wine. But I did see that pop up and I thought, I could probably do get behind it.
I've seen as well. We've had someone that's had a llama on their the Tevrim Drinking Club have had a llama on their pizza.
And that would work Chianti.
Absolutely, because you know, I imagine a llama is a relatively gamey meat.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. Right, should we tackle? We got 2 questions in the Q&A, and then I'm going to launch the poll. They're pretty simple, straightforward questions, Catherine. So I'm sure we'll tackle them nice and easily. The first is from Beth, who says, with the natural wine, it was full of sediment, and this is my first time trying one. What would you recommend the serving temperature? I think that's a good question. And then also, would you attempt to decant it? Honestly, don't decant it, because it's like this on purpose. You will have drunk wines this cloudy that are red before and just not known about it.
And even though, you know, you may be able to see here, you've got a slight level of sort of sediment at the bottom.
Yeah,
it's fine. You're going to be passing it back and forwards through a sieve if you were trying to, and you wouldn't get it out. You would, in fact, if you did it, you would actually probably just churn it up a little bit more. So really, if you wanted to take a bit more care, it would just be to make sure you've got it sat for, you know, a few hours before you open and pour it, so it does have a little chance to some of the thicker bits to settle, and then just take a bit of care that you're not pouring right to the end of your bottle. But as Anna said, it is cloudy in nature. It does add a little bit of texture to it. Serving temperature, definitely not fridge cold. I mean, I think all whites, other than sparkling, you know, ones that you can take out and let come warm up a little bit before enjoying.
I think on my pre-email I suggested that people take it out before and then pour it and leave it there until we got to it, which was what, half an hour at least. 20 minutes. I think that's about right. You kind of want to have it out you don't want to, the thing about the natural wine sort of generally is there is no one size fits all, so I think it's worth saying that. But for this wine that's so full of that fruity nature and is sort of light and refreshing compared to other styles, I think 20 minutes out of the fridge sounds about right. Still preserve some of that zinginess with the chill.
Absolutely, but you're letting your fruits come through.
And then a great question. William has asked, I'm sure everyone here has a nice supermarket or takeaway pizza, but what would you, or homemade, but what would you pair with a classic Domino's or Papa John's? And really, we're talking there about big Chicago crust pizzas, aren't we?
We are, but we're also, I think, talking when you're looking at the quality of your toppings. So, you're looking, perhaps your cheese is a little bit more in that analog cheese. So it has got a
cheese. I like
that. It's a term. It's more of that. So you can get that sort of that cheese pull, but it's not necessarily got the sort of the cheese flake. It's a little bit artificial. Let's be honest, and it can have a bit of a textural effect as well. Can give a little bit of a coating. I would say, out of the wines that we've got here, I would say the Chianti and the orange wine, because I think they both do have that cleansing, refreshing element just in the sort of textural style of the wine. Not looking at flavour at the moment. So I think for that sort of thing, you're often as well, perhaps your tomato base will have a little bit more oil to it. So sugar. A bit more fat, a bit more sugar. Your base is a little bit doughier. And let's not even get started on dips, because they could throw a whole other set of options into it. But
my quick 2 cents is that I recently not recently, but last year was in a family wedding at a big American pizza place that had that kind of deep crust, deep pan style, and their wine list was quite limited, but actually we had a very fruity, fresh, young Californian Pinot Noir. It wasn't like an expensive high-end one, and it had, exactly like Catherine's describing, the kind of freshness and the refreshing nature that cleansed your palate a bit. But actually, because it was young and fruity in style, the flavor was actually more similar to your Papaluna with that sweetness. So it kind of had the best of both worlds, sweet but light and juicy.
So I would throw in as well, like we always like to do, rosé.
Oh, rosé.
Look to your Spanish and Italian rosés. Gutsy, full of flavour, dry, crisp, refreshing, but really lovely and bright as well.
Oh, you've sold it to me, Catherine. Right, I'm ready for the poll sharing. Yes, I can see the answer. I'll share the results. So, only by a whisker, and I really do mean a whisker, by 1%. We have the Chianti Classico, and then second and third tied, so 31, 30 and 30. I don't think we've ever had it so close, first, second and third. So the Garnacha and the Limoux, so the Spanish, and so wines 1 and 4 came in second and third, and then the Burgenland Orange, which we always knew was going to be a challenge, still got 9%. So I'm really pleased with that. If I've persuaded 9% of people to try an orange wine, I'm delighted. They're not for everyday drinking. Well, they can be if you want them to be, obviously, but there's a time and a place. And for me, fun pizza evening is a great time and a place for a fun style of orange wine.
Absolutely. And it is a fun style. And if anything, it's just got a lovely label as well, hasn't it? That's always a winner.
Oh, well, there we go. I mean, another lovely, fun way to spend a Friday with you, Catherine. So thank you.
Likewise, thank you. And thank you, members, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed your pairings this evening. If you've still got pizza left, I'm going to go warm some up. Going to go back to it with maybe the Chianti, I think, for the rest of the evening.
And I'm going to take my orange wine, and as Alistair has just said, they loved it with the spicy one. So I'm going to go and see if anybody downstairs has left me any pizza. I suspect maybe not. My family are very greedy. But if they have, then I'm going to try it with the orange wine. And you'll have given me an opportunity to try something new, members. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. Have a lovely weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.